I want to talk about something that I don't think have had the opportunity to talk about on this program, and that is there were like 3 votes. Well, I want to talk about. There's 2 different things going on in terms of the dynamic right now. Soon, we're going to be following, the clown car more intensely than we have been now. I'm not a huge horse race and politics guy, and I would love not to be
But
able
you
to
do
talk
have
about.
to be excited by the Ted Cruz
Oh,
surge.
definitely, I love that stuff. I love that stuff.
He's now
But
at 16%. He's moving up.
he is
Ted Cruz,
moving up.
baby.
He's moving up, and I love it. But before we get there, what's been fascinating to me is here you have this Republican presidential primary. The Republicans, after their experience with Romney last time around, they did everything in their power to make sure that the season was shortened, right? Not elongated, for a couple of reasons. One, they wanted to shorten it so that they like physically shorten it so that they could bring up their convention so that their nominee could actually start spending general election money earlier, because Romney had run out of money over the course of a month or 2 in the summer and couldn't fight back against getting impounded by President Obama. They also didn't like how damaging it was to Romney, so they wanted to sort of sew this up for the establishment candidate earlier, so they have less debates. They've clustered these things. What's fascinating is that I think it's not going to work on either end. And let's talk about why it's starting so much earlier. Like, you've already got Jeb already damaged. I don't even know if he's an official candidate yet, but he's already been damaged.
Like massively damaged. And the truth of the matter is that a whole lot hasn't even come out on him or really been sort of focused upon, like his business record and his dealings when it comes to Terry Schiavo, which
But I'm talking about damage by the Republican Party. I'm talking about what happened in Indiana this week, and I'm talking about Tom Cotton and that letter.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, first of all, that put him, the Tom Cotton letter, that's one of the big, dividing lines. There's sort of the more business-oriented Republicans, you could call them, versus the more socially conservative. Again, they're all pretty much crazy, but there are some that put a little more emphasis on one or the other. That's how you get a Walmart, for example, saying to Asa Hutchinson, you better not sign this bill that's like the Indiana bill that will lead to potential discrimination and could lead to boycotts and the kind of approbation we've seen go in Mike Pence's direction. But you also have that same split among the dwindling number of realists, of the George H.W. Bush ilk left in the Republican Party versus the neocons, or the crazies, as they actually were literally known in the Reagan administration, who now are what we call the mainstream of Republican foreign policy thought. And one of those ruptures came over the Tom Cotton letter, as you say, because the reaction to that by one James Baker, who now I believe is 112 years old and has been in every Republican administration perhaps since Warren Harding. But he is a realist, and he, of course, served as Treasury Secretary under Reagan, and he was at the State Department under H.W. and Reagan, I believe. And he went and spoke at J Street, which is the more moderate version of AIPAC, by a lot more moderate. We could almost say the progressive version, and was very critical of Netanyahu, of this letter, for a variety of things, and that led a bunch of the neocons, Bill Kristol and some others. But again, while we've got Citizens United here, also Sheldon Adelson, who happens to have billions and billions of dollars and be a lunatic, who's actually come out openly for nuking Iran. And so he apparently got a message sent to Jeb, and so did Bill Kristol, who's considered a mainstream Republican figure these days, amazing as that is. And some of those other neocons, that if Jeb did not distance himself from Baker, they would be distancing themselves from him. And that Sheldon Adelson's billions of dollars would be distancing themselves from Jeb Bush, and he might even spend a lot of that money trying to defeat him. He's already used that threat against Rand Paul to get Rand Paul to back away from any foreign policy consistency he had. So, I mean, you're right. I mean, there's so many pitfalls now because you've got the Iowa caucuses, which shouldn't exist, but essentially are a percent of a percent of a percent. I mean, literally, even within the Republican Party, you start off with a general crazy. Then you have a primary voter who's even crazier. But then you have a caucus goer who's even crazier than that. So it is the ultra-evangelical right wing of the Republican Party that controls Iowa, which means all these guys suddenly have to be concerned about what's going to happen there. Then you've got the big spenders like Adelson with their crazy agendas. You can't have them open up if Adelson wanted to, he could put $50 million without even sweating, into a super PAC just to go after Jeb Bush. Or any other vehicle like that. So you've got that to worry about. And so these guys, it's amazing to watch because it's a bunch of crazy people battling it out. And that's hurt Jeb Bush. And then what Mike Pence did in Indiana by supporting this discriminatory act, Jeb Bush and all the other Republicans came out for it originally, which is going to hurt them very much with most of the general public.
Jeb Bush tries to tack back from it, but you've now within the idea that, has he even officially declared? I don't know if he's officially
declared.
Nothing
I'm aware of.
But, at this point, the idea that he would have to be reminded of his neocon roots and then also be shown to actually be more socially conservative than the sort of the mainstream narrative wants to present of him. In by March of this year is sort of stunning. And so the campaign has been elongated on the front end, and then with
that's right because of the money people, and you need the sort of they call it the invisible primary, call it what you want, but you're lining up to land the support of key money people because that is now such a disproportionately important part of the process. You're lining up to get the key, operatives with the big names. That shouldn't matter because most of them have reputations well beyond their actual ability, except for the fact that that affects how the mainstream media reports on you and whether they'll give you a chance and say that you're, somebody who people should pay attention to. And if anybody thinks that doesn't matter, ask Gary Johnson from the last Republican nominating session, or what's his name from Louisiana, whose name I've forgotten.
Jindal.
Not Jindal, Romer. Was it?
Oh, right.
Yeah, who was basically ignored because the media can choose to do that, ignore somebody or pay attention. There's a whole bunch of guys who are in single digits. So to say that it's just because those guys are in single digits is not being honest. If you're in single digits, but they in their minds they decide you have a chance, or they want you to have a chance, they'll pay attention to you. And when I say mainstream media, there's a lot of that is conservative media, from your Fox News to your Weekly Standards and places like that. So all this stuff affects all this. And to think Jeb Bush can navigate this, he ran on the hard right when he ran for Florida. He was actually the right-wing Bush. George W. was the more moderate of the two when they both ran for governor in Florida and Texas. Now he's suddenly tacked to the center, which he really hasn't. He just supports some actual educational standards, which I disagree with Common Core for other reasons. But the point being that the reason the Republicans don't like it, they don't want any testing at all. Immigration reform, again, that split with the business side of the Republican Party. And then when it comes to sort of at least tolerance on gay rights, it's actually become a defining issue. Who would have thought that? But it is in the Republican Party because the demographic these guys all need to appeal to is the 18 to 54 people that shop, people that generally have disposable income, who tend to be more moderate to liberal on social issues and not haters, frankly. And most, 7 in 10 people now know somebody or friendly with somebody who's gay. That would be almost that entire group we're talking about. So they're in a very difficult place. I'll say quickly, and I know I've been talking too long here, but basically they're in a place where the Democrats were about 20, 30 years ago, and the Democrats were ahead of where the public was. Which nobody should apologize for on many of these issues, and Democrats had to appease, and make their base happy, while then appealing to a large mainstream of the country that often would say, we think segregation's okay, or mixed marriage shouldn't be allowed, or whatever, and that's not 20 years ago, that's more like 40 or 50. But now the Republicans have to be able to somehow appeal to this crazy old white.
But it's different. You're right. It's basically the mirror image, right? Because
it's exactly the mirror image. Yes.
Because it's trending away from them, and and the amazing thing about this is that they are dealing with two problems. It's trending away from them, and then you have, because of these super PACs, and because of all the money that is sloshing around on the right, it means that on the back end of the campaign, it's going to go on longer because, again, Newt Gingrich et al., they all showed why they're, from a personal standpoint as a candidate, there's value in you staying the race. And the reason why people couldn't do it is just they couldn't afford to do it. But now you've got these super PACs who are out there. So the money is, there's a lot less, the money is much less limited. And it also is to push certain issues. So they will finance somebody to go around.
The last election, Rick Santorum doesn't exist if it's not for Foster Freeze.
Indeed.
10 million, one on top of another, $10 million checks, if into this super PAC. And look at who these guys are we're talking about. If you talk about Sheldon Adelson, you talk about Foster Freeze, you talk about the Koch brothers. In those cases, we're talking about white guys, mostly from either more conservative states, and maybe not in Sheldon Adelson's case, but he's right wing in numerous other ways. The Koch family from Kansas originally, Foster Freeze from Wyoming. They're basically these are right wing families involved with oil who are from rural states, and we're talking about white males who are all at least in their late 70s, if not older. And so that's what these are the guys who are controlling the big money too. These aren't just your caucus goers, but they're people that have a disproportionate influence, and their thinking is not representative of where the rest of us are.
And their ability to say, like, you know what, I'm going to spend another $5 million just to keep this guy in the race another 2 or 3 months. And anybody who approaches him and says, hey, this isn't good for the party, he just goes, excuse me? It's just their mentality is not going to be. They're not going to back down to the party. And then the irony is, on the front end, the money has hampered the Republicans because you get the Tom Cottons, you get the Mike Pences, because you now have so much money sloshing around. And I've said this many times before, that this is one industry, the Republican Party, and 2 different companies going at it. So you have on one hand, sort of the Koch money or the establishment money, and then you have like the Koch brothers money and the Heritage Foundation money. And so they're all basically saying, like, hey, you don't have to drink from the same trough anymore. You can be your own independent company in the same industry of crazy. And it always seems to run down to the lowest common denominator.
That's right.
And so,
which in the end, and maybe the Ted Cruz surge, such as it is proof of that they have, in the end, much like they've done to their own congressional caucus, by the fact that they redistricted to a point that these guys are appealing to the craziest people in the world and don't have to appeal to sort of general sentiment. They're basically leading their guys off of a cliff somewhere. Because in the end, if you need to appeal to them, even any of the money we're talking about, you need to appeal to get through this, is not, again, representative of mainstream thought. So you have to twist yourself on a pretzel to take some of these positions, and then which is what Mitt Romney had to do. And then you've got the Mitt Romney who ran in Massachusetts maybe would have had a shot in the national election.
Right.
But by the time he was done, basically recanting every position of his, from supporting an assault weapons ban to being pro-choice to being in favor of gay rights, and a variety of other things that he was in favor of, his health care plan, which became Obamacare essentially. At that point, there was nothing left of him. And I don't see how that doesn't happen again. So good luck and Godspeed.
Indeed.